and I am in Abilene, Kansas at the Museum of Dwight David Eisenhower. And we are going to share some information about Ike, that was his nickname, when he was just a young boy. Eisenhower family lived in Abilene, and the father, David, got an opportunity to work in Denison, Texas for a couple of years. So the family moved down there, and that's where Ike was born. They lived there for a couple of years, and then they came back to Abilene, to the house that we have here on campus eventually. And Ike lived here from that point until he graduated from high school and went to West Point Military Academy. Now, what we're going to mainly talk about today is Ike as a young boy. And I'd like to direct your attention to the image behind me. Now, if you were going to take a guess, who do you think that might be? Anybody want to venture a guess? Think in terms of who we're talking about.
We have John Paul and Maggie said that it's Ike. And the Armstrongs said it's Dwight Eisenhower.
Very good. And we're going to go ahead and I'm going to use the term Ike from here on out because that's kind of a term of endearment that we use since we think he's such a special guy. Now, he doesn't look very presidential in this picture because as a young boy, he lived on the south side of the tracks. His family was a very modest family. Their religious upbringing led them to live a life without a lot of luxuries. They didn't spend money unnecessarily, and they had just a simple life. So one of the things that Ike and his friends liked to do was to go camping. So they would go down along the Smoky Hill River, which is further south from Abilene, and they would spend the night and they would go hunting, and if it was in season, they'd go fishing, but they really liked to just spend the time outdoors. And you did see a lot of pictures of people from that time period in these really comfortable overalls. I wonder if any of you have overalls at your house. Anybody wear them when they're out working in the garden or playing? Do we have any similarities here? Anybody answering? Maybe some of the teachers do.
You know, a lot of them are actually responding, no, they don't have overalls.
Oh, well, they're really comfy, let me tell you. And they really wear well. So you might check into that if you're an outdoorsy kind of person. All right, now, but another thing about this picture is Ike is, you don't see any furniture out here, no playground furniture or anything, but he would take with him something that looked like this. And we're going to talk about that in two different times of our presentation. It's made out of wood. What do you suppose the function of this would be? What would he use this for?
Miss Anguano's class says it's a milk stool.
Oh man, they got it right. But when he's not milking a cow here, but he would take this with him so when he was sitting along the bank of the river, he could plop himself down on that and not have to sit in the dirt or the mud. So if you can see the bottom half of this picture, you'd actually see one of these in the picture. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the things at the turn of the century. Eisenhower, Ike, was born in 1890. So think back in time, what were things made of at the turn of the century? If you were going to play with some toys or do some activities, what would be the main material that those things might be made out of?
We have several answers. Maria, Piper, they all said wood.
Wow. Wow, they're pretty smart. Why not plastic? Why wouldn't they use plastic? Anybody guess why not?
The Armstrongs said they didn't have plastic yet. Some said it just wasn't invented.
That is exactly right. Now, there is something else that things might have been made of, and that's metal. But metal would have been more expensive, and we're talking about a family with simple finances. So if we're going to talk about things made out of wood, we're also going to talk about this little item. Almost every boy would carry a pocket knife with them. and that would be used for all different kinds of things, from whittling a piece of wood to maybe digging something up out of the ground. If they went hunting, it might help in cleaning an animal. It would have been a multi-purpose tool. So I'm going to show you an example of something that would have been carved. Now, these are two boxers, and if you can look at their arms, they've got boxing gloves on them. And it's hooked together here with some wire. And the way you would use that is you would click it back and forth and make those guys just go crazy boxing. So that's an example of how someone carved something out of wood, used colored pencil to put the shoes and the trunks and the faces on them. We're going to look at some of the toys that Ike and his brothers may have used. This is a whirligig. And this could easily be carved out of sticks. And let's see if I can do a better job of it. It's supposed to be kind of like a helicopter. So let's see. Nope, I can't do it very well. But you get the idea. Okay, let's look at this one. Oops, I should always put my knife closed. I'll bet some of you have seen some of these. It's a yo-yo. And nowadays they're made out of metal or plastic. But this one is made out of wood. And if you got really good at this, you could even walk the dog. All right. There's all kinds of fancy tricks that you can do with the yo-yo. This is a toy that's a really good one for eye-hand coordination. So this little ball down here is supposed to end up in that cup. And you think, oh, that's a piece of cake. Oh, I touched it at least. Now, sometimes I can get it in there, but not always, especially not with bright lights shining in my face. So that's a really fun toy to play with. I'll bet you've played with tops before. So this is just a carved piece of wood with a point on the end, and it spins and spins and spins. This is a set of dice that were carved out of wood, and then the dots are marked on it with black. And there's all kinds of games that you can play with dice as well. This one's kind of an unusual one. If you've studied pioneers at all, you might have seen this before, because we have it at our Heritage Center and some of the other places. And it's all strung together with these ribbons. And what it does is it will look like someone's climbing a ladder or going down the ladder. And it's just mystifying how that does that, because it's all linked together with those ribbons. Let's do it this way this time. So that's kind of fun. So that would have been something the boys played with on the inside. Now,
Miss Donna, I have a question.
Yes.
The Armstrong said, were the dice marked with charcoal?
actually, I think these look more like ink, but that would have been a solution in that time period. Very good. Now, the things that I have here to show you have a special name. When we're studying about history, we want to make sure that the things that we're learning are true. So we depend on something called primary sources, which in easier vocabulary, we call them artifacts. So these artifacts are from the period that we're talking about. And so Ike was born in 1890, and then we're talking about his boyhood, and he left Abilene around 1910. So these artifacts are all from that time period. Now, what's exciting about some of them is I said that we have the Eisenhower home here on campus. So we can go into that home and see some of the things that those boys used. This is not the exact same set of dominoes, but the stores would have sold more than one set. So someone else had a set just like Ike's that we were able to buy to show you. But this actually is in, one like it is in the home. And it contains the set of dominoes. And if you've ever played dominoes, maybe you've practiced your math facts using the dots on the dominoes, or maybe you've been an engineer and have stood them up in a big row and then knocked them all down. And that's kind of the domino effect. That's kind of a fun way to do it. Another artifact that we can see in the Eisenhower boyhood home is a board like this. It's double-sided. On this side is a game called Chinese checkers. And each person gets a colored set of marbles, and they put it 2, 4, 6 people can play this game. And the object is to get all of your marbles across to the other side. So it's a little more complicated than the flip side, which is a checkerboard. And has anybody played checkers? I need to know if we have any checker players out there.
Yes, we have lots of checkered players. They play very often, actually, chess and checkers.
Good. I was going to say you can play chess on the same board, just different different things that you put on it. Here are some wooden checkers. Back when I was teaching school, if we had a rainy day, we'd break out the checkers boards and see if we could have a checkers tournament even. So we got kind of competitive. So that's a fun old-fashioned game. Now, these are some of the things that the boys played inside. But you know, there were 6 boys in that family. And if you could come on campus and see the home, you would realize that it wasn't a very big home. So they played outside a lot. So I have some games that maybe they would have used outside, just a simple jump rope. You know, that's not just for girls. Lots of wrestlers and boxers and all kinds of people jump rope to get really, really healthy. So that would have been a common outdoor activity. Now this is one, once again, we're talking about pioneers as well. This is a ring from an old wagon. And you can do this in several ways. You need a stick. And one way is you can get it rolling along and guide it from the inside to keep it rolling. Or sometimes they would have a board with a T on the end, and you would push the hoop. Stick and hoop is what the game would be called. So that was really fun, and it took a lot of skill to do that. Another game that maybe you might have heard of, this was from my childhood, it's a game called jacks. And you've got these little pointy things. You don't want to leave them on the floor where somebody can step on them. You would put those down, and you needed to have a bouncy ball. And what the object was is you would bounce the ball and catch it, but before you caught it, you'd try to pick up some of the jacks. Hey, I got one. Oh, I got another one. And then you go through and you pick up 2 at a time, and then 3 at a time. So that was another competitive game that was really fun. You could play it by yourself, or you could play it with friends. Now, they would have done all kinds of, you know, climbing trees and chasing each other, but those Eisenhower boys were athletic. They all liked playing baseball and football. I liked it so much that a friend asked him one time what he wanted to be when he grew up, and the friend said that he wanted to become president, and I said, I don't want to be president. I want to be a professional baseball player. So there was a guy named Otis Wagner that he thought was pretty special. So Ike played a lot of baseball. Yes.
Miss Donna, we had a really great observation from Piper and Bliss. They said that the ball seems kind of big. Is that the right size ball?
I have tried to find an authentic ball. We have a team of period baseball players here that usually play a game in the summertime. And they've shown me one of their authentic balls. This almost looks more like a softball than a baseball. And this is more the accurate size of an old-fashioned baseball than what the balls got littler and the gloves got bigger. So this is pretty much the size of what the old-fashioned baseball gloves look like. Excellent question. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you a story about Ike. He loved baseball so much, and one day during that time period, the sidewalks downtown Abilene were made out of wood, and Ike tripped and fell on the wood and cut his knee, and that gave him an infection. And it got so bad that when Dr. Conklin came out to visit, he said, oh, Ida and David, we're going to have to take your son's leg off. And Ike heard that and says, oh, no way you're not going to take my leg, because I wouldn't be able to play sports then. And so Dr. Conklin says, well, keep giving him the medicine and we'll just see what happens. And Ike asked his older brother to sit outside the bedroom door so that Dr. Conklin couldn't sneak in and take his leg off. Well, over time, the medicine made the infection go away. But Ike had missed so much school that he had to repeat a year of school and ended up being in the same grade as a younger brother. But you know, he persevered, he went on, he played ball for Abilene High School, not only baseball, but also football, and even played ball when he went to West Point until he fell off a horse and hurt his knee again. So that goal, though, was not to become president, but to become a professional athlete. Okay, and I'm going to stop for just a minute here and see if anybody has any questions, and we're going to move our artifacts to indoors. Anybody have any questions?
Did Ike play on school teams?
Yes, he did. He played on the Abilene High School baseball team and football team. Let's turn this around.
Mrs. Anguano's class asked, Miss Donna, this is a challenging one, but I bet you got it. What's the age difference between Ike and his brothers?
Oh, goodness. They came pretty close in age. 1, 2, 3. I think there were 3 older brothers, then Ike, and 2 younger brothers. And maybe 2 years in between. The first 3, I think I know, because his older brother graduated just the year before Ike. And then I said he had to be in the same class as a younger brother. So those 3 were just right together. And then from that, I don't know. But we can look that up.
And we have one other question. What were a few of his other hobbies than just sports?
Oh my goodness, you know, he loved to read. He had a book in his hand all the time. And as he got older, it was Westerns that he really liked to read. He liked, I can't remember the one author, but he read a lot of Zane Grey also. So that kind of went along with Abilene's history. In case you don't know it, Abilene is the original cow town where the ranchers drove their cattle up to Abilene and got on the train to go west. I mean,
we have a lot of great questions. We're going to field 2 more before we move on to indoor chores. Miss Donna, how did you learn about all of these things that you're showing us today?
Well, you know, I grew up here in Abilene, and in fact, my childhood home is just a couple of blocks from here. So I have always had an interest in the Eisenhower family. Then in school, we were very proud to learn about our native son. Then I became a teacher. And in 3rd grade, we always celebrated Ike's birthday on October 14th. And so we'd always do lessons about Eisenhower. And as he started out as a soldier and was a 5-star general in World War II. So his leadership skills were so good that we've tried to study them and find out what character traits he had that helped him to be such a good leader. Then he went on to be the president, and so we studied him again on President's Day. And in between that, every time I had a question, I'd go get a book and I'd read about whatever time period I didn't understand yet. So he's a pretty interesting man. But those books, you've got to read if you want to learn anything.
Okay, and then this is a fun one, and the answer might be different than today. But at what age did a boy get a pocket knife back then?
Gosh, I think they were pretty young. I'd say probably as soon as they got through the toddler years. And I can just picture a dad sitting down with his son and sitting on one of these milking benches and teaching him how just first of all to whittle a point on a stick. Because I know my brother and I both had pocket knives when we were kids. So I'd say maybe 8 or 9. But boy, you sure have to be careful with them, because otherwise you can not only cut yourself, but you could cut someone else too. So got to be careful with those knives. If anybody's a scout, you might have had some experience already carving a bar of ivory soap and making it float in the water. I think that's what we started out with.
I'm going to slip one more in. Did girls have pocket knives?
You know what? That time period pretty much had the roles of little girls established and the roles of little boys were established. So it might have been a unique girl at that time who had one, but the culture of that time, the little girls played with dolls and other indoor kinds of toys. But I bet you if we researched hard enough, we could probably find that they did too. All right, so we're going to talk now about the chores, because before the boys could play with any of those fun things, they had to get the chores done. Now, I think I mentioned earlier that they lived on the south side of the tracks in kind of a modest area of town, but that allowed them to have about 2.5 acres of land. And they got this land from an uncle that let them live there. So they had a barn, they had a huge garden, they had a chicken coop, and they had an orchard. Now, so if you can imagine all of these different things that had to be done then before the boys could go to school or before they could play. So let's think once again, turn of the century, no indoor electricity, no indoor plumbing. So how would you do simple things? How would you wash the dishes? Think about that for a while. What would the boys need to do to be able to wash dishes if you couldn't just turn on the faucet and have the water come out? Can somebody help me out? Yes?
They might have to go to the well and then bring the water into the house.
Right. Maybe they used a bucket like this. If any of you guys in Abilene went to Pioneer Camp, you would have experienced that, bringing the water in and putting it in a wash tub like we have right here. Now, this wash tub would have been instead of an electric washing machine, and we're going to use a pair of overalls, like I said, that Ike had, and we would fill this with hot water. Maybe the water was heated up on the stove. We would have our bar of soap. Now, this was store-bought soap, but many times the homemakers made their own soap called lye soap, and it was pretty rough on your hands. So we get our water in the bucket, we put our clothes in there, and if you've ever looked on the inside of a washing machine, there's something that goes around and around and up and down. It's an agitator. That's what this is. So you put that in there and you'd squish up and down and squish up and down. And then maybe you had a spot where you were out playing baseball and you slid into home base and you got a bunch of grass on your knees. So you take your soap and you rub the soap on that spot, and then you'd use your special tool called a washboard. And you'd rub that until you got all of the dirt out of it. Then you'd have another wash tub with the rinse water in it. Now, am I going to put this in the dryer to get it dry? Somebody help me out. Thinking 1890 or 1900, what are we going to do?
I'm getting lots of no's. Ooh, you could hang it up.
Exactly.
A clothesline.
A clothesline. Every house would have a clothesline, and you'd have your clothespin basket where you would get your pins out of there. I'm going to pretend that there's a clothesline here. We'd hang that up and pin it to the line so it doesn't blow away. And Mother Nature does the rest and puts the air freshener in it and everything. So those would be chores that the boys would have to help with. And Ida rotated those jobs. So everybody learned to do the chores equally. Now, I keep talking about boys. Ida was not lucky enough to have a daughter. She had 6 boys, so she was pretty smart. Instead of just teaching the boys the boy chores, they also learned what the girls would have traditionally done as well. Okay, now another thing that they would have done outdoors. What do you think this is? Can you get it? I've had kids guess, and they thought it was a pancake flipper, a fly swatter. So what do you think it is?
The Armstrongs say, is it a racket?
A racket to play badminton or tennis or something?
What about, oh, these are great ideas. Is it used to make butter or to pick apples?
Oh my goodness, those are all good. I could whack the apples down. No.
We have Jan says it's a rug beater.
Oh, has John been to a pioneer camp? Okay, in the 1900s, they didn't have wall-to-wall carpet. They would have had area rugs on top of the wooden floors. And they didn't have electricity, so what would have been missing? Maybe when you do chores at home, how do you clean your rugs? Real quick, like, somebody chime in. What do you use to clean your rugs?
The Armstrong says there weren't any vacuums, so that's what we use today.
You wouldn't use one of those little robots that just roam around your carpet and pick up dirt. No. This would be your vacuum sweeper. You would take your carpet and hang it over that same clothesline and then just whack away until you got all the dirt and dust out of that. And the boys like to play baseball, so don't you know they practice their batting swing with one of these as well. All right, very good. Okay, now I don't have pictures of the other things that you might have had to do for chores for outside, but let's go back to the fact that they had a barn. And in that barn, the Eisenhowers had a cow and a horse, and beside the barn was a chicken coop. So the boys were very responsible for the needs of those different animals. So let's start with the chickens. What would chickens need to survive? What would the kids have to do to keep those chickens healthy? Do we have any farmers out there?
Food, water, corn, hay.
Very good. So the chickens would need all of those things. So this would be a multi-purpose bucket, maybe the water and the feed, make a couple trips, get all that stuff out there. And then what would we get back from those chickens? What might we gather?
Eggs from Miss Anguano's class and Ryan.
And everybody understands that then. What came first, the chicken or the egg? That argument can go on, but we're going to collect those eggs from the chickens. So they might have used this. Then if you're going to talk about the barn, one of the things, if you have livestock, you know that you always put straw or hay down for the animals in their stalls to collect, what nature has happened with the animals. And so you always want that to be as clean as possible. So every morning the boys would have to muck out the stalls and get all that dirty stuff out and lay the fresh straw down. And those animals would also need to be watered and fed. But we're going to take this combination for the other animal that we're going to talk about, the cow. Now, sometimes we think in terms of the beef that we get from the cow, but if you want to keep your cow around, what can you get from a cow that you can use inside your house? Do we have an answer?
We have lots of answers coming in. Milk.
Milk. All right. So we start with the basic milk. So we're going to use our milking stool and our multi-purpose bucket, and we're going to set the bucket underneath the udders, which is the part of the cow the milk comes out of. And we're going to sit down on our little bench, and with the 4 udders that are there, we're going to squeeze gently and get the milk out of that cow, and hopefully she won't kick us. Okay, when we're done, we're going to bring that bucket of milk into the kitchen. And I'm going to let it sit right here for just a minute and let it get more room temperature before we do anything else with that. Now, we've got another container here. Let's go to the garden and to the orchard. The garden was huge, and the boys had to take turns planting, weeding, watering, all of those things to get the garden growing. And then when you harvest the garden, they would also go out and collect all of the different foods. So what do you think they might have planted in a garden to feed 6 boys, David and Ida and Grandpa?
Ryan says vegetables.
Perfect. Yeah, from the garden. Anybody have any more specific ideas of what comes from that garden?
Mary says corn.
Excellent.
John Paul and Maggie suggest tomatoes and corn.
Good.
Carrots, potatoes.
All right, we do have some gardeners. All of those things are things that Ida would have grown and the boys would have helped with. Now, as a thank you for helping with the garden, each of the boys got to have their own separate little plot. And so one of the things that I like to plant were tomatoes, corn, and some peppers. When they lived in Texas, Mrs. Eisenhower learned how to make Mexican tamales, which are wrapped up in cornmeal, and it's got masa and beans and corn and all kinds of yummy things in there. Well, in Abilene, that was a pretty new recipe. And Ike wanted to earn money so that he could buy some baseball equipment. So he would take his little red wagon, he'd make up a batch of tamales, he'd pick the extra tomatoes and the corn and the cucumbers, any of those things that he had grown, and he'd go on the north side of the tracks where the people with more money lived, and he would sell all of those vegetables and especially his tamales. So he got a pretty good reputation for being a good businessman, and then that allowed him to have money that he could spend on athletics. So that was pretty good. So we're going to get rid of that. And let's go back to my bucket of milk. Now, what we're going to do with this bucket of milk, it's really at this stage, we would call it cream, correct? Because it's really, really thick. If you've ever had whipping cream at your house, maybe Mama's going to whip it up and make something, it's really, really thick. So we want to separate that. And who can tell me 2 products that we're going to get after we use something like this? What are we hoping to get from that cream? Can somebody guess?
Ooh. We have, they're all coming in, butter, cheese, buttermilk, curds.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. When we turn this, and I've got to hold it like this, can you see the paddle turning around in there?
Whey.
Very good. So this is the process. Somebody would sit and turn this until the curds and whey separated. And then eventually it would get hard to turn, and you kind of like if you've ever hand cranked ice cream, it's really thick. Then we would pour that out into a bowl of some kind, and wooden bowls were very, very prevalent at that time. We would take a paddle and we would press all the rest of the moisture out of that and gather it up. And then we would take something like this and put that butter in there and tap it down, let it chill or cool, and we would squeeze out what would be a block of butter. Very, very good. Sometimes people added a little bit of extra salt. Other times they just left it natural, and it wouldn't be really yellow like our butter because they didn't add any other colorations or anything. Then with what's left, you could use that to make your buttermilk biscuits or pancakes, or some people just like to drink it. It was really, really good. Now I've got another little contraption here from the turn of the century. Let's play What Is It? It's got another handle. You would put something in here and turn the handle, and when you're done, you'd open up the drawer and you'd have something in here that the adults mostly would use.
Our participants are really quick today. They picked up on it that it was a coffee bean grinder.
Wow, very, very good. So you put the beans in there, you grind it up, and boy, would that make fresh coffee. Then you'd have that to put in your coffee pot. Very, very good. Now, one of the things that Mrs. Eisenhower did was bake bread, because that was a good standard food item to have along with their vegetables and their eggs and their different things that they would eat. So we have it from our research that Mrs. Eisenhower made 27 loaves of bread a week. Now, if you know wood-burning stoves or early stoves, she wouldn't be able to bake those all at the same time. So she spread it out over 3 days. So how many loaves of bread would that mean she had to make at one time? How many of these pans would she make each time she made bread? We getting some answers in? Somebody doing the math? You typing?
They're coming in. I thought I would just give a little more time for those still working it, but we have several answers from Ryan and the Armstrongs and John Paul, Miss Anguano's class. Would it be 9?
Very good. A for the day. Very good. So that's still a lot of loaves to make. But like I said, 6 boys, mom and dad, grandpa, they might have had guests sometimes. And sometimes that bread didn't last until Sunday. So on Sunday was the day, because the baking of the bread, you know, the yeast has to rise and all that. So it's a longer process. So on Sunday, they might make baking powder biscuits and use some of the buttermilk from the So this was a lot easier to make. And Ike told a story in his book, At Ease, that one day he and his brother were asked to stay home from church on Sunday to make a pie. So they were making their pie dough, and you know, we know they like to play ball. Well, they have a ball of dough, and they started playing catch and toss, and it dropped on the floor a couple of times, and maybe got a little bit dirty, and then all of a sudden they were out of time. They didn't have time to make any more dough, so they went ahead and rolled the pie crust out, put the filling in, and baked it, and they promised that they would never tell Ida that the pie dough had been on the floor. So that was one of his memories of being a cook. Well, we normally think of the girls as being the chefs, but Ike learned how to cook, and he used that skill throughout his lifetime. He loved to barbecue and make beans and stew and some other things. Another skill that the girls were asked to do was sew. So Ida didn't have any girls, and those boys went through a lot of clothes. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you what those boys would have had to do to mend a hole in one of their socks. Because I said this is a modest family, so they're not going to run right out and buy new clothes. They were taught to mend their clothing, to sew a button on their shirts if they fell off. And what we're going to do is to darn a sock. And that doesn't mean like, oh, darn sock. That means we're going to fill the hole in with thread, and I've got my thread knotted. It's a little technical difficulty here. Just for a moment, let's see if we can get it unknotted. Nope. Okay, we're gonna have to, I'll do it with a shorter string then. First thing we have to do is put a knot at the end. That worked out. I have 2 artifacts here. What do you think I'm gonna do with these? What am I gonna do? These are gonna fit inside the sock. If you notice, that is the shape of the toe of the sock. So I'm gonna stick that in the sock, and there's the hole. So I've got the knot on the end here, and I'm just gonna start with the darning needle and go in and out. And if I were being more careful, I'd make that knot disappear. But I've got the sock inside out, so you're not gonna see that. So you just keep going, and if you've ever worn a sock that had a lump in it, or maybe you had something in your shoe, that lump can make a blister on your foot. So man, you don't wanna make this cause a blister. So you wanna make sure that as you're sewing it, it's gonna lay flat on there. Then you get to the end of the hole, and there's going to be a loop there, and I put the needle right in that loop, and that makes a knot for me. So there, I no longer have a hole in my sock. Now, there's rumors that maybe the boys might have even helped do some quilting, but we can't find exact documentation for that. But we're hoping that maybe they helped Ida with that as well. So what we've done now is we've explained that Ike Eisenhower played hard, and he worked hard, and he learned lots of responsibility and respect for what it takes to have a house. And those leadership skills are what helped him to be such a good general in World War II, and then the 34th president from Kansas, the 34th state. Do we have any real quick questions? And then we're going to take you on a little bit of a tour here of the gallery. All right, so right over here, Eisenhower went to a school right across the street from his house, and it's called Lincoln School. And so when you come down to visit our museum, you can see one of the chairs that he sat in. We've got a picture of his class, and you can probably pick him out, because after a while you'll recognize his face. Then over here, we have a creamery where he and his father and another brother worked when they got older. We've got a great big picture of the whole family. And we've got all boys. Ike is the one over here on the left-hand side, but we've got a person in the middle with long curls. And that was actually a boy also. Sometimes the mothers would let their boys keep their curls until they were out of their, when they were a little bit older. Then as we come around, we've got a picture of part of one of the house and the railroad station where he left to go to West Point. And this is the main street of Abilene, Kansas. And for those of you who are familiar with Abilene, you might try to figure out just where is that located? Where is the photographer standing? And we're going to leave you with the thought that Ike was very proud of his community. He was proud of his upbringing. In his book, he said, I guess we were poor, but I never really knew that. And that's a really tribute to his family for raising them to be proud of what they had. And his quote is saying, the proudest thing I can claim is that I'm from Abilene. Thank you very much.
All right, do we have any other questions before we wrap up today?
We'd be glad to answer any questions. Put your thinking caps on.
We got lots of thank yous.
Oh, good, good.
All right, well, if we don't have any
Well, you can always research Ike by getting on the Eisenhower website or the Eisenhower Foundation website. And if you have any other questions, you can contact us and we'd be glad to help you find the answers.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your really engaging presentation today. And thank you everybody who attended. Have a great afternoon. All right, bye everybody.